The Colorado Defense Expo pulsed with energy. Towering banners gleamed in cool LED light, projecting shimmering images of prototype drones and armored vehicles. Across hall, B clusters of young professionals in branded polos bustled about with tablets and QR codes. Children in virtual pilot helmets laughed as they weaved through the crowd, voices bright against the low, steady hum of machinery and conversation. Near the edge of that crowded hall, Earl Whitaker stood still. His figure was quiet, easy to overlook among the glint and motion. A worn brown cardigan hung over an olive shirt faded with age. The shoes on his feet were scuffed, more functional than fashionable. A soft cloth cap, battered and familiar, rested over his weathered brow. Faint, nearly invisible lettering still clung to the front F-111 program, Tactical Systems Division. No one noticed. No one asked. Earl preferred it that way. In one hand, he held a notebook, its once sturdy cover now creased and softened by decades of use. His other hand leaned on a cane, the metal worn smooth beneath his grip. He stood alone, gaze fixed on the demonstration bay marked Autonomous Flight, Next-Gen AI Swarm. Earl's breath caught. For just a moment, the small array of quadrotor drones preparing for lift reminded him of another time, a time when such formations existed only in rough sketches, when dreams of autonomous flight were carried out on punch cards and slide rules, not sleek touchscreens. He took a measured step closer to the rail. A group of young staffers in charcoal gray polos blocked his path, laughing and sipping energy drinks. Their posture was casual but territorial. "Excuse me," Earl said softly, voice nearly lost in the ambient din. "Would it be all right if I stood here, just to get a better view?" One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, barely glanced over. "VIPs and tech sponsors only, sir," he replied flatly. Earl nodded once, eyes flicking back toward the drone platform. "I'll stay out of the way. I'd just like to watch." Another staffer smirked. "You sure you're in the right hall? Veteran tributes are back in Section E, near the food court." Laughter rippled through the group. Earl's grip tightened slightly on the cane, though his voice remained calm. "I'm not here for a tribute, just the tech." A third staffer leaned toward the other's voice, raised just enough for Earl to hear. "Probably thinks he flew one of these back in Nam." More laughter. Earl said nothing. His eyes never left the drone array, now beginning its warm-up sequence. Tiny rotors whirred to life with precise mechanical rhythm. From across the hall, Jenna Rhodes, lead systems engineer on the Swarm AI project, walked past just in time to catch the tail end of the exchange. Her stride slowed. Something about the way the old man stood unmoved by the taunt's eyes, clear, steady, caught her attention. She stepped between Earl and the staffers. "Is there a problem here?" she asked coolly. One staffer straightened. "No, ma'am, just crowd control." He was asking to stand and observe. Jenna's tone remained even. "That's hardly disruptive." "Make room," the young men muttered and stepped back. Jenna turned to Earl. "Would you like a closer view, sir? I can take you past the rail." Earl blinked. "I appreciate it, but this will do. I just want to see how they handle cross-drift on lift." Jenna's brow lifted. That wasn't casual curiosity. She noticed the notebook in his hand, its edges frayed corners, folded, a thin schematic peeking out beneath the cover. She nodded once. "Enjoy the show, sir." The drones rose in unison, smooth arcs of engineered grace. Earl watched them with laser focus, his gaze tracking each subtle adjustment, each coordinated movement. He wasn't watching like an observer. He was watching like a man who once helped build their ancestors. No one around him knew. And that notebook, it wasn't for show. It was filled with designs drawn by hand in the dead of night, when prototypes existed only as fragile dreams. It was the symbol of a life spent building, not for recognition, but for purpose. A small boy tugged his mother's hand nearby. "Mom, look, that man's notebook. It has blueprints." His mother glanced down, distracted by her phone. "Don't bother him, honey. He's probably just sketching for fun. Let's go." As they moved on, Earl gave the boy a small smile and a slight wave. The boy waved back, one brief, innocent connection in a sea of noise. Moments later, the same staffers from before strolled past again. One pointed at Earl's notebook, still scribbling with a pen. "That's some boomer-level stuff." Another laughed. "Heard he tried to talk to one of the engineers. Thinks he's got ideas or something." Their voices faded into the crowd. Earl remained still, flipping another page. Fail-safe redundant access control. 1984 testbed, initialed EW. Across the hall, Jenna returned to her workstation. The earlier technical glitch, a drone hovering at a crooked angle, still troubled her. Earl's words echoed in her mind. Wrong lift vector. Curious, she pulled up the error logs and compared them to the glimpse she'd seen in his notebook. The angles matched, almost perfectly. Her pulse quickened. Fingers moving swiftly, she searched the military archive. Index E. Whitaker UAV Design, 1980s. Results returned quickly. Confidential project, Vortex Lab. Lead architect Earl Whitaker. Codename Whitlock Alpha. Jenna's heart skipped. She turned eyes scanning the hall. Earl was still there. Notebook open hand, steady, turning each fragile page as if returning to a familiar conversation with the past. The drone demonstration had ended minutes ago, but Earl Whitaker hadn't moved. He stood quietly by the rail, his hand still resting on the cane, the other thumbing slowly through the fragile pages of his notebook. Around him, the Expo's clamor surged once more. Another wave of attendees flowed through Hall B, chasing the next spectacle. The memory of Jenna's offer still lingered, her voice clear, respectful, but Earl had chosen to stay back. Not out of pride, not out of fear, just familiarity. Distance had always been a comfortable place for men who'd spent lifetimes in the background. Across the room, Jenna sat at her terminal, reviewing logs and schematics, while unease tugged at her concentration. What she'd seen in Earl's notebook, those notations, the angles, they weren't just similar to her system's architecture. They were her system's architecture. Only older, handwritten, pure. But the others hadn't seen what she did. As Earl turned another page, a thin trail of whispers and stares began to ripple around him. The three staffers who'd mocked him earlier were now stationed near the stage, assigned as commentators for the next demo. They hadn't noticed Jenna's lingering glance or the way her eyes had widened at the search results. All they remembered was an old man who'd wandered where he didn't belong. "He's still here," one muttered. "Sketching again," said another, mock laughter tucked into his voice. "I swear he thinks he's updating our firmware." The third leaned in, whispering just loud enough for others to hear. "Hey, maybe he's drawing crop dusters this time." Their chuckles rose above the ambient buzz, unkind and effortless. Earl didn't respond. He simply turned a page. The paper crackled faintly, so old it sounded like leaves in fall. On the open spread beneath smudged pencil lines in ink that had long since faded to gray, sat a diagram labeled Failsafe Drift Control, Vortex Module 2.3, Char EW 1982. The line work was exact, surgical, drawn not for flair, but for clarity, like someone drafting something that might save a life. A child wandered by again, the same boy from earlier. He slowed, holding tightly to his plastic replica flight controller. His eyes landed on Earl's notebook with quiet fascination. He tugged his mother's sleeve again. "Mom, look," he said. "That man's still drawing the jets." She didn't look up from her phone. "Honey, I told you don't bother him." "But he's writing real stuff," the boy insisted, eyes wide. "Not pretend." "Keep walking," she said flatly. Earl glanced down, met the boy's gaze, and gave a small nod. A soft smile touched his lips. The boy smiled back in unspoken recognition before being pulled away into the tide of foot traffic. Connection, brief, gone. Behind Earl, another group passed by, this time recording on their phones. "Yo, check it out," said a young man in designer sneakers. The notebook dude is still posted up, drawing like it's 1979. He angled his phone for a better shot. The screen flicked to life, camera rolling. "Say hi to TikTok, Professor Boomer." His friend laughed. "Someone tagged this wrong hall wisdom." They walked away snickering. The video would go viral later that night, racking up thousands of views for its supposed absurdity. But in the moment, Earl heard none of it. Or perhaps he did and simply chose silence over confrontation. Again. Because Earl wasn't there for attention. He had no press pass, no exhibitor's badge. Just a name few remembered, and a mind full of legacy code that still flew in the sky. From her booth, Jenna watched the boy's failed attempt to engage, then the teens filming, and her stomach turned. It wasn't cruelty that disturbed her. It was how easily dismissed he had been. Like a time-worn tool left on a shelf, forgotten by the very hands that now built on its legacy. She clicked back to the system logs. That same vector error, the one that had thrown the drone into a crooked hover, still lacked explanation. But she remembered what Earl had muttered. Wrong lift vector. Quiet, precise. She glanced toward him again, then toward her supervisor, Director Albright, still busy shaking hands and posing for press photos. She hesitated. The decision to speak up now or stay silent wasn't just technical, it was generational. Jenna had worked her entire career to be heard, and now she stood at a crossroads not between promotion and demotion, but between truth and convenience. Back at the drone bay, Earl turned another page. His eyes didn't flicker, but his heart was tired. In his youth, he'd briefed congressional panels. He'd landed a test aircraft with no working instrumentation. He'd once designed a terrain-adaptive guidance system on a napkin during a blackout. But now, standing among blinking LEDs and photo ops, he was just an old man with a notebook. His symbol, the notebook, was not nostalgic. It was functional, alive. But no one asked to see it. No one asked him anything, except the wind in the hall and the boy who tried. And so Earl remained where he'd always been, close to the truth, far from the spotlight. The crowd ebbed and swelled around him like a current against a stone, never really seeing, just passing. Behind him, the staffers readied their tablets for the next drone showcase. Just read the prompter, one mumbled. Nobody cares if it's technically wrong. They're here for the visuals. Their laughter blurred into background noise as the projector dimmed again. But Earl's mind stayed sharp-locked, not in bitterness, but memory. And memory, as he knew well, is what keeps machines and people from crashing blindly. The lights across Hall B dimmed. A familiar hush rolled through the crowd. Technicians moved swiftly behind the scenes, preparing for what the program had billed as the highlight of the Colorado Defense Expo, the grand unveiling of the Nova 9 tactical swarm. Spectators gathered in tighter clusters, faces angled upward toward the towering main screen. Phones rose like a forest of antennas, ready to capture the spectacle. Through it all, Earl Whitaker stood quietly now, off to one side of the rail. The boy with the flight controller was gone. The staffers who had once mocked him stood only feet away now, stationed as commentators glancing nervously toward the stage. Their earlier bravado had dulled to something less certain. From across the hall, Jenna Rhodes moved with purpose. Her mind raced. The system logs the match with Earl's notebook. It wasn't coincidence. She had already run a search. Whitaker, Vortex Lab, UAV design. The results still glowed on her tablet, lead architect terrain adaptive autopilot. Codename Whitlock Alpha. Now she stood before Director Shane Albright, her voice low but urgent. "Sir, we have a problem," she said. Albright barely looked up from his phone. "Old guy with the notebook." "What kind of problem?" Jenna straightened. "He's not a problem. He's the guy. The one who developed the original fail-safe loop in our low-altitude autopilot systems." Albright frowned. "Classified legacy code." She nodded. "He wrote the algorithms we still use. By hand. In 1984? Albright's expression shifted. His gaze flicked toward Earl, really seeing him now for the first time. But before they could act, the main event began. A booming voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the highlight of this year's Defense Expo, the unveiling of the Nova 9 Tactical Swarm, our most advanced battlefield intelligence drone." To date, spotlights flared. The screen displayed sleek graphics of drones flying in precise formation, simulated strike zones flashing in vivid color. Applause swelled through the crowd. Albright leaned toward the booth coordinator. "Pause it. Kill the roll. Sir, cut the feed now." But it was too late. The video feed glitched. A flicker of static rippled across the screen. Then not a marketing clip, not a simulation, but something older appeared. A black and white scan. A hand-drawn schematic, then another, and another. Page after page from Earl's notebook, projected in enormous detail across the giant screen for all to see. Circuit diagrams, flowcharts, mathematical notations in careful block letters. The symbol of his life's work now towering over the audience. A gasp rippled through the room. The announcer's voice stumbled. "Please stand by. We are experiencing technical difficulties." But Director Albright stepped forward, first seizing the microphone. His voice wavered, then steadied. "Before we continue, I need to acknowledge something. Know someone." He scanned the room. "Mr. Earl Whitaker, if you are still with us, Would you please come forward for a moment? Earl didn't move. Then a gentle hand touched his elbow. Jenna. Please, sir, this is your moment. He nodded once. Slowly, cane tapping softly against the floor, he made his way toward the stage. As he passed, the same three staffers who had laughed earlier parted without a word. Their eyes followed him now, not with mockery, but with dawning understanding. Earl climbed the steps. His frame was modest, steady, beneath the full weight of hundreds of eyes now fixed upon him. All but Bright spoke the foundation of the Nova 9, and much of what we showcase here today was made possible by this man. Earl Whitaker was the lead systems engineer behind the Whitlock Alpha program, an architecture so advanced it remained classified for decades. The algorithms guiding our swarm control systems, he wrote them, by hand in 1984. A deep silence blanketed the hall. Phones lit up. Searches began. Chris Earl Whitaker trended within minutes. Then a soldier in uniform stood. A silver star gleamed on his chest. Sir, in Kandahar, 2004, one of our drones stabilized after a crash spiral and transmitted targeting data that saved my convoy. You're telling me this? He pointed to the code now filling the screen. Earl met his gaze. If it was Nova 4 or earlier, yes. That line saved your lives. The soldier stood straighter. Then I owe you more than I can say. Others rose, next engineers, veterans, cadets, faces lined with quiet respect. One by one, they stood, and then an unexpected voice. The tall staffer, his earlier arrogance gone, spoke, Sir. I was the one who said the wrong hall thing. Earlier, I didn't know. I didn't look. Earl's brow lifted. What's your role? I onboard new UAV data into the core training module. Earl's voice was calm. Then what you do matters. Never forget that. And still the moment had not ended. Overhead, one of the Nova 9 drones, grounded earlier, suddenly detached from its display rig. Its rotors spun to life with a soft, resonant hum. Jenna's eyes widened. That's not pre-programmed. The drone rose slowly, gracefully, then shifted its lights to a pulsing amber, a hidden legacy mode Heritage Protocol 3X, buried in the code untouched for decades. Earl watched without surprise. His eyes gleamed steady beneath the weight of memory. The drone hovered above the stage, then performed a sequence left-right level, the aerial salute once used by fighter pilots to honor fallen comrades. A technician whispered into his headset, Sir, the input command was labeled Salute Whitlock Origin. It's been in every generation of the code. Waiting. Albright's voice broke the silence. 40 years ago, Earl Whitaker coded a tribute function into the drone AI. No one triggered it until today. Earl's fingers brushed the side of his notebook as if to say, You didn't forget me. You just didn't know you remembered. In the audience, an Air Force colonel rose, hand raised in a crisp salute. Others followed, officers, engineers, students saluting, not the machine, but the man who had taught it to honor something greater than itself. Jenna's voice quivered. You programmed it to salute you? Earl smiled gently. No, I programmed it to salute anyone who earned it. I just never thought I'd live long enough to see it. From the back of the hall, the young boy's voice rang out. Are you the man who made the drone smart? Earl's smile softened. I didn't make them smart. I made them remember. Remember what he knelt, slowly, voice clear, to look down before they fall. To listen to the ground when the sky gets too loud, and to never forget who's underneath them. Waiting. The crowd remained hushed, then a slow, reverent applause began to rise. Not loud, not showy, but the kind of applause given when one knows they are witnessing something that may not come again. Earl Whitaker had come to see the future, and the future had remembered him first. 2 weeks had passed since the drone saluted. The headlines moved on as headlines always do. Flashier tech emerged. New prototypes. A sleeker model announced by a competitor in Phoenix. Yet across military bases, university labs, and engineering departments, something lingered, a subtle change, like a gear catching just right after years of slipping. It began with a simple internal email. Jenna Rhodes had sent it late at night with no subject line. Just a quote in the body and a digital attachment containing scanned pages from an old worn notebook. Don't just build machines. Build something that lets someone get home. E. Whitaker, 1984. By Friday, the quote appeared handwritten on a whiteboard in the Vortex Lab Design Hall. The following Monday, it showed up etched into the aluminum casing of a mock-up drone. By month's end, it was printed on the welcome badges for junior cadets at the Air Force Academy's UAV orientation. But more than that, people had begun to listen. At a base in North Carolina, an ethics instructor opened his seminar not with a textbook, but with a story. When drones forget where they came from, he said, people stop coming home. At Vortex Labs' quarterly town hall, Director Al Bright, once known for fast-tracking legacy code clearance, stood at the podium and addressed the R&D division. From today forward, no system moves forward unless we know who built its foundation, and no voice gets dismissed just because it's quiet. Earl Whitaker never asked for any of this. In truth, he knew very little of it. He had returned to his modest one-story home on the outer edge of Fort Collins, where the cottonwoods rustled softly and the traffic faded by sundown. His garage was cluttered with parts tubes of Soldair and a half-disassembled radio from 1967. The floor creaked in familiar places. He was bent over the workbench, coaxing a frayed antenna back to life, when Jenna knocked. She brought coffee and a visitor badge. This time it bore no barcode or security clearance, just his name. Earl Whitaker, Title Technical Advisor Emeritus, Heritage Systems Division. He studied it for a long time. You know I don't do titles, he said quietly. Jenna smiled. It's not a title, it's a reminder. He ran his thumb over the ink, nodded once, and didn't argue. That afternoon, Jenna drove him to the Vortex campus, not to the glass-paneled towers of modern R&D, but to Building 7, the oldest structure on the grounds. Its brick facade was chipped in places. The metal railings rusted. But beside the entrance, bolted into fresh cement, was a new plaque, the Whitaker Lab, for those who remember what came before. Inside, the lights were warm, the floors clean. Dozens of young engineers lined the hallway, not because they were told to, but because word had spread. They stood in quiet rows as Earl passed some nodding others, just watching. He didn't offer a speech. He didn't need to. Jenna guided him into a small lecture room. At the front sat a familiar face, the boy from the Expo, still clutching his sketch pad, his flight controller hanging from a lanyard. Earl looked around. Am I supposed to talk? Jenna shrugged. Not supposed to, invited to. Earl stepped slowly to the whiteboard. He took the marker in his hand. For a moment, the room was still. Then in careful print, he wrote, build it like someone's life depends on it. Because it does. He turned around. That's the first rule, he said. Now, who wants to ask me why your fancy quadrotor can't land worth a damn in a sandstorm? Laughter rippled not at him, but with him. And from that day forward, Earl wasn't just a name in a notebook. He was a living thread woven back into the cloth of an industry that had almost forgotten what held it together. The three young staffers who had once mocked him sat in the back. All three now interns in the Heritage Systems team. They didn't speak at first, but they stayed after class. Eventually, one stepped forward. Sir, he said, can I ask you something? Earl looked up, gentle as always. When you knew your code worked and then saw people changing it, breaking it, weren't you angry? The room went quiet. Earl closed the notebook resting on the podium and folded his hands over it. I didn't write code for pride, he said softly. I wrote it for soldiers who had people waiting, for medics who needed 5 more seconds of air cover, for choppers that needed to land under fire. The moment you write for yourself, you forget who you're supposed to protect. Another student raised a hand. Didn't it hurt being forgotten? Earl paused. What hurts isn't being forgotten, he said. It's when people don't even know they've forgotten. That's what silence feels like. But silence, he added, is just the breath before wisdom. And slowly the students leaned in, not because they were told to take notes, but because they wanted to remember. Weeks passed. The name E. Whitaker spread not as a headline, but as a principle. One student taped a handwritten quote above the exit door of Whitaker Lab, built something that lets someone get home. Another scrawled beneath it in smaller ink, and never forget who helped them land. The drone that had saluted Earl was returned to its rig, restored, but untouched, its amber lights never lit again. But at night, interns sometimes stood below it and looked up, as if waiting for it to move again. It never did, because it didn't need to. Its final gesture had spoken clearly, and the man who coded it had been heard. Earl never asked for a statue, never wore a medal, never posted on any feed, but his name lived on in every boot-up sequence that paused just long enough to ask, what came before? And far away in a dusty garage outside Fort Collins, an old man bent once more over a piece of disassembled circuitry, the last rays of sun catching the edge of his notebook. He adjusted the antenna, tuned the signal, and smiled.